Hey folks, in this video we're going to go over what we feel are Puppet Combo's worst games relative to the rest of their repertoire. Now keep in mind, in this video we don't mean to say that these games are bad games or severely flawed in any way. As a matter of fact, we don't think there's a bad Puppet Combo game in existence. Rather, we just believe that in the Puppet Combo / Torture Star library of digital experiences, we think these fall short of the quality that the collection of exceptional and average IP offers. Indie developers only have so many assets at a time at their disposal, but given the right understanding of what makes scripted entities on a map a good game, these people have demonstrated that they can deliver excellent experiences to horror game players. So long as we're judging the value of Puppet Combo games as deviating from a mean, this mean being the worth of all Puppet Combo games holistically, then we can separate the superb, the good, the decent, the mediocre, and the execrable. And just to remind you, dear viewer, in an era where indie horror can technically be defined as literally anyone with an asset programming what barely qualifies as scripts, and then releasing it for consumers to play, a game has to be exceptionally detestable to be considered bad by us. As a matter of fact, we think since its inception, download-based indie horror has become rather infamous for its lack of quality control for what isn't made by AAA studios. So going forward with these premises initially put forth, we'd like to structure this video into 3 different types of the worst Puppet Combo games. Foremost, there's the best of the worst. The games least likely to have you disappointed in Puppet Combo as a developer, but are still lacking plays nonetheless. Then there's the flat-out bad. And to top it all off, there's the holy shit Puppet Combo, you can do so much better than this. To start off with, and to delve into the first category mentioned, there's Spiders, which is a 2018 survival FPS game developed by Puppet Combo, which appears to be a Call of Duty Zombies / Left 4 Dead style shooter in that the player has to survive as long as they can against waves and waves of enemies that are out to get past the player's defenses and kill them. In essence, defending them from an outbreak of giant spiders from a cave in Brazil. And by this, we don't mean how spiders are able to be fixed with a can of taro. No, we mean full-on Pennywise's final form kind of spiders. We should first mention that this game's premise is a good one, seeing as the games that seem to have inspired it are busy and intense gaming experiences for serious amounts of high-energy fun whenever gamers want a challenge. So although it's a detour from Puppet Combo's typical run away from the maniac style of slasher survival horror, it falls short of feeling like zombie survival games. The premise of the gameplay is that you have to defend your family from the spiders who are out to kill them, and what you initially have at your disposal include wooden planks you can board the windows up with to stall the advance of the spiders, and a limited number of weapons you can use to actually kill the spiders. During the early parts of the game, the introductory phase is good enough because you're actively getting acquainted with what you have to do, and the spiders that come in small waves are manageable enough to where you can test the effectiveness of your guns. Eventually, the number of spiders trying to get into the house at a time increases with each successive round, but you also unlock more powerful weapons to deal with each onslaught, and this is where our grievances with the game set in. After the first few rounds, the weapons are only so effective against certain breeds of spiders. Certain types of enemies are so resilient to the point where you can spend almost the entirety of a clip or your chamber of shotgun shells on a single spider, and you end up rationing your ammo because of it. In other zombie attack games, they typically reward you with ammo proportionally relative to the strength of your enemies. The ammo for the weapons tends to respawn really fast, but the problem is that the spiders end up boxing you into certain locations throughout the house, and this formula of spending entire clips on tough spiders while having just enough ammo to spare gets old after a while. This isn't helped by the fact that the levels go from 0 to 100 in terms of their difficulty, mainly because of the web spiders, which give the spiders a massive edge over the player once a few of them are inside the house. They do exactly what they sound like they do, that being make webs all over the house, slowing the player down and or trapping them. Also, there's no ability to make yourself a Shrek player model in this game, so that's a massive loss. When the player has reached these levels, it essentially becomes a game of mostly boarding the windows up instead of actually fending off the spiders. Eventually the Black Widow comes along, and it's an underwhelming boss fight. You just run to the opposite ends of whichever room you're in, shoot it, then rinse and repeat. A couple levels later, you get to the Queen Spider, which is the final fight of the game, and it's pretty unfair because of the wide range her projectiles cover. In short, we feel this game doesn't capture what makes wave-based zombie survival games great. The exact same problem doesn't plague our next pick though, as Blood Maniac suffers from a lack of intriguing design in general. Transitioning into the second category at this point in the video, in this title you're a knife-wielding maniac who's escaping a psychiatric hospital and is out for blood. This can best be described as a stealth game because the object of each stage is to kill everyone and not get caught wielding your knife, or else the police show up to stop you. Throughout pretty much all the levels, you can get by via calmly walking up to people when you don't completely engulf their vision, or crouch and sneak kill them when you've reached the later levels. For a certain portion of the game, you steal a white van from a convenience store to get to a house, but this segment seems like a disconnect from the broader gameplay since the transition could have been like any other level and put up a loading screen. Maybe Puppet Combo wanted to experiment with racing aspects at one point, but stealth necessarily relies on patience, clandestineness, and silence to deliver its experience to the player. When you're driving around in a loud hunk of metal that consumes Venezuela worth of gas every time the pedal feels air being wafted in its direction, it doesn't feel like you're trying to evade being spotted. Granted, there's a patrol car that follows you because at this point it makes sense for the local Texas authorities to know you've escaped, but the way you avoid being caught is either driving far away from the Texas patrol, or parking your van next to the trees and exiting the van so you can hide Larry in the trees. No matter how you decide to get through this part, the game doesn't feel like itself because here you're purely evading, and in the rest of the game you're trying to kill people faster than they can take you down. But that's not the core issue that afflicts this game. That would be its monotony. Pretty much nothing changes throughout each stage besides your potential victims being more densely packed into smaller areas in each map. It barely gets more challenging, and as it goes on, the strategy is to rinse and repeat the same formula. But even though the core problems with the two aforementioned games are that their gameplay is swarming with homogeneity, the complete opposite can be said for the next three games in that they don't have much in the way of gameplay at all. The Riverside Incident is a game published in 2019 that's a found footage experience of an unknown person carrying around a camera and wandering around a derelict, abandoned building. Then it cuts to a house, and then cuts to a house burning while sirens can be heard in the background. The game is boring to say the least. Actually, we'll go further with our descent. When you're late in the game, you'll feel like watching paint dry would be something you'd pay to see. Flies fucking would feel like it's worth being on pay-per-view. Seeing grass grow would deserve a prime time slot. Although there are plenty of peculiarities and interesting sights in the psychiatric hospital, we don't think the journey embodies the quality of what exploration horror as a genre has given us. Games like Amnesia, The Dark Descent, and Outlast are quality experiences because there's a heavy level of interactivity in them. The former is in essence a key-finding simulator most of the time, but occasionally gives the feel of depth and realism to 19th century Prussian aristocrat castles by having the player use crowbars, put levers in slots, use tinderboxes and sledgehammers. Not only that, but ludicrous amounts of detail have been put into the maps made for the game by the developers and modders to truly sell the ambiance. With the latter, there's incredible attention to detail and immense amounts of content packed into each section of that game's psychiatric hospital, and the enemies are fun to evade. Because Puppet Combo has delivered better games of this length and quality of development, we think they could do much better if they wanted to pursue an exploration-based project. Going past the liminal point between the second and third category of games, many of the same issues in the Riverside Incident plague our next game, Day 7. This is a 2019 exploration game that revolves around an office worker named Terrence, who's glitched into the emptied Barnes & Noble's version of the backrooms and must survive them. As the next 7 days progress, Terrence encounters with various characters that dwell in the backrooms and must do everything he can to find his next meal. Faced with no other option than to feed on the flesh of the others who glitch into the best blessing a game map designer could be bestowed, Terrence becomes a cold-blooded killer. Day 7's shortage of riveting gameplay is significantly worse than the aforementioned games because many of the significant plot points in the game aren't what the player arrives at due to a natural conclusion of the plot. The events being so tacitly scripted are what contributes to its linearity in addition to its lack of player input. Most of the time spent in-game either consists of walking around the same section of backrooms or reading the dialogue between Terrence and the other characters. There's virtually nothing here that actually kept our attention besides the fact that this was a backroom-centered game. But by far the worst offender of lacking any real gameplay experience at all is Sam Hain. This takes the cake, or should we say candy, for the most lacking experience we think Puppet Combo has brought forth. This because we think it nails what should be brought to this market in terms of a cool aesthetic and mythological premise, but does the opposite of that in almost every other respect. In addition to the streak of 2019 horror games, this is another exploration game that follows a girl named Alice, who's been told by her mother to take her younger brothers trick-or-treating. All the game consists of is trick-or-treating, the brothers going missing after the player has walked a few trails, a scarecrow telling Alice she'll get a lot of candy if she goes down his recommended trail, then Alice completing a ritual to summon the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The only things we find noteworthy about this game are its 1 more degree increase in global surface temperature anomaly sky, soundtrack, fittingly spooky atmosphere, and general art style. Oh, and we also think Alice is by far the dumbest puppet combo protagonist. So what can we take from all these development flaws? Well, it's one thing to actually include gameplay in your products, because that's what gamers are there for. We want to experience something pleasing to be interacted with. And this necessarily means designing your game in a way that keeps the player engaged. Gamers should enjoy mechanics that make sense and are conducive to a thrill that serves the utility well. Step 1 of this is working out the kinks in the gameplay of the unfinished piece to eventually make it into a good game altogether.